I'm Elena Reyes, 28, freelance graphic designer and only daughter of my mother, Carmen Reyes. The day they opened the house to divide my mother's belongings, I wasn't even told. I only found out because a cousin posted a group selfie on Instagram, everyone grinning in front of Mom's antique mirror, like it was a backdrop for some influencer shoot. By the time I got there, the house smelled like lemon wood polish and expensive perfume. Shoes were piled messily at the door. Loud chatter spilled from the living room, and my heart raced like I was walking into someone else's home. The air conditioning hummed softly above, muffled by the velvet curtains Mom had sewn herself. The hallway was too clean. Her framed embroidery, once gently crooked from years of being bumped, was perfectly aligned, like someone had pressed reset. I stepped into the living room just in time to hear my Aunt Patricia say, "These should stay in the family." She was holding Mom's jewelry box. The jewelry box. The carved sandalwood one lined with faded green velvet, where Mom kept her mother's brooch, her engagement ring, and the necklace she promised would be mine one day, the opal one she wore on every birthday and graduation of mine. I was frozen. Her voice cut again. "Elena's not really part of the family now," she said lightly, almost joking. "She was always more like Carmen's little roommate." "That doesn't make you blood." My voice cracked as I stepped forward. "I'm her daughter." Patricia didn't even turn. "You're not on the list. This is for next of kin." Her husband, Uncle Theo, shifted awkwardly beside her, but said nothing. I turned to my cousin Daniel, standing stiff by the bookshelf. "Did anyone tell you I was coming?" He looked down. "I thought you'd moved. Far away." The truth was, I'd moved 20 minutes out of town and visited Mom every other Sunday until she got sick. I was the one who took her to chemo. I was the one who cleaned her apartment while she slept. Patricia, on the other hand, didn't call until the funeral. Still, here I was being told I wasn't family in front of a room full of people who'd eaten my mom's cooking, who'd been given her crocheted Christmas scarves and laughed over her stories. I glanced at the box in Patricia's arms and quietly said, "That necklace was meant for me." She smirked, fingers curling protectively over the lid. "There's no proof of that." My heart dropped. I took a step forward, but a man in a black blazer suddenly blocked my way. "Security. From the firm handling the estate. I'm going to have to ask you to step outside." "Miss," he said. His voice wasn't cruel, just firm, like I'd wandered into a restricted gallery exhibit. Tears started rising before I could stop them. My cheeks burned. My hands were shaking. I looked around the room for anyone to speak for me. No one moved. If you've ever been pushed out of your own story, if you've ever watched people laugh over memories that still leave you crying, just know. I see you. Drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. Just as I turned to leave, the door opened. A man in a navy suit entered, flanked by two assistants carrying folders and a sealed envelope. His voice echoed as he spoke to the room. "I'm Jonathan Hale, the attorney of Carmen Reyes. Before any division of property occurs, I've been instructed to read the sealed portion of her final will aloud. All beneficiaries must be present." Then he looked at me. "Elena Reyes," he said, stepping forward with authority. "You are required to stay." The room fell completely silent. I felt 20 pairs of eyes swing in my direction. Patricia's face turned pale, and for the first time in years, the entire room was looking directly at me. The weight of their disbelief clung in the air. I didn't move. I didn't need to. I didn't move. I just stood there, my shoes still dusted with the dirt from Mom's front steps, hands clenched by my sides. Every breath I took felt louder than it should have. Jonathan Hale turned away from me and toward the stunned group gathered in the living room. As stated by Carmen Reyes in her final testament, a sealed addendum was to be opened only in the presence of all persons who had expressed interest in the estate. That includes Elena. He emphasized my name again, almost like he was reclaiming it from the floor where Patricia had trampled it just minutes ago. My aunt's voice came out sharp. That's impossible. Carmen and I spoke often. She never mentioned an addendum. Mr. Hale raised a brow, and yet here it is. He held up a cream envelope, marked with red wax. Carmen's familiar looping handwriting on the front. I recognized it instantly. That was Mom's. There was no mistaking the curls of her ease, or the way she always pressed the pen too hard on the last letter. He broke the seal. I swallowed. The addendum is dated 2 weeks before Carmen's passing. It is handwritten and witnessed, per legal requirement. He cleared his throat and began to read. To whom it may concern, especially my sister Patricia, if you are hearing this, then I have passed, and you are likely hovering over my things like vultures over a warm carcass. Forgive the image, but honesty was always our family's rarest heirloom. A few cousins let out gasps. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Jonathan continued, "Elena is my daughter. She is my everything. She has wiped my mouth when I was too weak to chew, changed my sheets when I was too proud to ask, and read to me when I forgot the sound of peace. I have seen what family means when no one is watching. This letter is to make clear the jewelry box, along with the opal necklace, all pieces marked with my initials, and the quilt from my wedding chest, are to belong to Elena Reyes. These are not items to be split. They are symbols of legacy, and they belong with my child." Someone behind me murmured, "She really wrote that." Jonathan looked up. "There's more. And to anyone who questions blood over bond, I say this family isn't who calls when times are good. It's who stays when you've lost the will to answer. This addendum stands as my final wish. May it be honored with the same devotion my daughter gave to me." Silence. A long, breathless silence. I didn't blink. My throat was dry. I could feel the tension in the room tightening like a wire. Then Patricia slammed the jewelry box shut. "Well, if it's written like that, then what can we do?" Her voice was brittle, fake sweet. "Of course, we'll respect Carmen's wishes." She didn't look at me. Not once. But Uncle Theo reached over and gently took the box from her hands. Then, slowly, he walked it to me. He didn't say anything either, but I saw something in his eyes. Maybe guilt. Maybe understanding. I took the box. My fingers brushed the carved lid. It still smelled like my mother's perfume, vanilla and rosemary. I didn't open it. I just held it. As Jonathan began organizing papers for signatures, people started to shuffle awkwardly. The room filled with whispers and sideways glances. One cousin gave me a tight smile. Another avoided eye contact altogether. I turned and walked out. Not fast. Not like I was running, but with the kind of grace my mother always told me to hold, even when everything inside felt shattered. Outside, the sky was the softest shade of blue. My car was parked a few houses down, under the shade of a leaning jacaranda tree. Its purple blossoms had started falling. Some had landed on my windshield like they were trying to soften the view. I placed the jewelry box gently on the passenger seat and sat there for a while, hands still trembling. It had happened. The necklace was mine, but more than that, she had spoken. From beyond the grave, my mother had stood up for me, not in whispers, not in half measures. She had called them out and named me. The emotions came in waves: gratitude, anger, grief, all wrapped in the silk thread of validation. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." I stared at it. No idea how to reply. Then another message came. From Patricia. No hard feelings. Just business. Hope you're doing okay. That one made me laugh. No hard feelings. Like we'd just closed a deal, not torn through decades of family wounds. Still holding the phone. I looked over at the jewelry box again. I reached forward and lifted the lid slowly. Inside, nestled among green velvet, lay the opal necklace. It shimmered the way it always had, subtle, milky, like it was holding in every storm it had ever weathered. There was also a note tucked beside it. My name was written in Mom's tiny, tight scrawl. I unfolded it. Elena, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I hope you're wearing something ridiculous and beautiful today, maybe even red lipstick. I saved this for you. You know why. You were always more than a daughter. You were my reminder that love doesn't end where pain begins. Don't fight for them to see you. Let them miss the chance. Love always. Mom. My eyes stung. I pressed the note to my chest and leaned back in my seat. The quiet around me felt less like absence and more like protection. I didn't need to walk back inside. They'd already seen what they chose to ignore, and Mom had already said what I'd waited a lifetime to hear. That evening, I didn't go home. I drove instead to the beach, Mom's favorite stretch of coast. Not the tourist one lined with surfboards and frozen lemonade stands. The hidden one behind the crumbling chapel where she used to take me when I was little. The one where the tide whispered instead of roared. The sun was low, casting long golden streaks across the water like someone had taken a paintbrush and dragged it across glass. I took off my shoes and walked barefoot through the sand. The jewelry box cradled in my arms like it might vanish if I let it go. I sat down on the rocks and finally, for the first time since the funeral, let myself cry. Not the polite kind of crying people do behind sunglasses. The real kind. Shoulders shaking, breaths hitching, salt in my mouth, on my cheeks, in the air. I didn't just lose my mother. I lost my place. And now, standing in the aftermath, with her final words still echoing in my chest, I wasn't sure what to do next. The wind picked up, tugging gently at the note I had folded and slipped into my jacket pocket. I reread it. I must have read it 10 times by then, and yet each word felt different every time, like it aged in minutes instead of years. That line, "Don't fight for them to see you. Let them miss the chance." I whispered it aloud, like a spell. The waves didn't answer, but they didn't need to. The silence was enough. When I got back to my apartment that night, everything looked smaller. Not in size, but in meaning. The pile of dishes in the sink, the overdue electricity bill tacked to the fridge, the unopened envelope from the client who still hadn't paid me. It all felt like background noise. I put the jewelry box on the kitchen counter, beside a framed photo of Mom laughing while holding a seashell against her ear. I turned on the kettle, poured a cup of chamomile, and sat at my desk. There were things I needed to say. I opened a blank document and titled it, "What They Don't Know." Then I wrote. I wrote about the months I slept on the floor next to Mom's bed because she couldn't breathe if she lay flat. About the hospital nights, the insurance paperwork, the awkward conversations with nurses who treated me like I was just a neighbor. I wrote about the time Patricia sent a single get-well-soon card with no return address, and how Mom just smiled and tucked it under her pillow like it was the greatest effort in the world. I wrote about the fear, the loneliness, the aching need for someone, anyone to say, "You're doing great," and how that sentence never came, so I had to learn to say it to myself. The page filled quickly. It wasn't for them. It wasn't revenge. It was for me, to see myself, to remember, to honor. By midnight, I had 5 pages of memory. I saved it and closed the laptop. As I stood up, I caught my reflection in the window. My eyes looked tired, my lips pale. I opened the jewelry box one more time. The necklace gleamed under the kitchen light, soft opal, warm gold chain. I put it on. It sat against my collarbone like it had always belonged there. Not flashy, not loud, just steady, like Mom. I went to sleep that night curled under the same quilt she left for me, the one from her wedding chest. The stitches loose in some places, tight in others, the corners soft and fraying. I slept deeply, for the first time in months. In the days that followed, things didn't exactly improve with the family. Patricia sent another message, this one clipped and distant. Your mother's words were dramatic. But fine. I hope you're satisfied. I didn't answer. Daniel texted again, too. This time, I found an old photo of us playing cards at Aunt Carmen's. Want me to send it? I told him yes. He sent it that afternoon. We couldn't have been older than 12. I had braces. He had a bowl cut. We were laughing over a deck of Uno cards, a bowl of grapes between us. Mom was in the background, blurry but unmistakable, holding a mug, smiling at us like she was trying to freeze the moment in her heart. I saved the photo. Later that week, I ran into Theo at the grocery store. I was grabbing laundry detergent when I saw him in the bread aisle, holding a bag of rolls like he didn't quite know what to do with it. He saw me, froze for a second, then nodded. I nodded back. He walked over slowly, cleared his throat. Elena, he said, I just want you to know. Patricia was wrong. I didn't speak. He continued. Your mom. She loved you more than anything. We all knew that, even if she didn't say it in front of everyone, and I should have stepped in. That day. I'm sorry I didn't. That took me off guard. My jaw tightened. It's okay, I said eventually. You did what you could. You brought me the box. He looked down. She always talked about that necklace. I should have guessed it was meant for you. I almost told him about the note. Almost. But instead I just said, thank you. Before he left, he pulled something from his jacket pocket. It was a Polaroid, Mom. Younger. Holding me as a baby. I found this in an old album. Thought you might want it. My throat tightened again. I nodded, too full to speak. He left quietly. I stood there a long time, staring at the photo under the fluorescent light of aisle 9. That night, I placed it next to the one of her with the seashell. My altar of grief was becoming a little lighter, a little more like memory. I didn't expect what came next. One afternoon, I got an email from Mr. Hale's office, a scanned copy of the full will. I'd been added to the distribution list, but there was something else. In the margins of the document, in Carmen's handwriting, were notes, personal ones, next to a section about her books Elena used to read to me during the worst nights. Give her the ones with pressed flowers. Next to the kitchenware. She never learned to cook, but she always made me tea. Leave her the blue kettle. Every line like that was a thread, tied directly from her to me. Not everything was legally binding, of course, but it didn't matter. She wrote them. She remembered. She saw me. And now the others would, too, whether they admitted it or not. I printed that email, not because I needed proof, but because I wanted to hold it. Something about touching the paper, feeling the weight of her words in my hands, made it real in a way screens couldn't. I taped it inside the back cover of her favorite poetry book, Pablo Neruda, the one with the cracked spine and coffee stains, the one she'd marked with hearts beside her favorite lines. It felt right, like the margins were finally speaking for themselves. Over the next week, things began to shift quietly, like rearranged furniture in a familiar room. Daniel called one evening, not a text, but an actual call. Hey, he said, voice a little unsure. I was thinking. Maybe we could go through some of the boxes together. From the attic? I hesitated. What attic? You know, the one above the laundry room at your mom's place? She stored a bunch of old stuff there. Photos, letters, I think even cassette tapes. I hadn't known. She never mentioned it. Why me? I asked softly. There was a pause. Because she'd want you to have them? He said. And because I think I owe you more than an apology. We met 2 days later, keys in hand, standing in front of the weather-worn house that once felt like the whole world. The outside hadn't changed much, peeling white paint. The rose bush still half dead from summer heat. And the wind chime Mom bought from a roadside market still clinking faintly by the door. But inside, everything felt different. Empty. A house in transition. Quiet in a hollow way. Daniel climbed up to the attic while I waited below. A few minutes later, he passed down the first box, then the second. We carried them into the living room, setting them down beside the couch she always napped on. He didn't stay long. I'll let you look through them on your own, he said, brushing dust off his jeans. Just thought, someone should pass the torch. That surprised me. You're not keeping anything? He shrugged. I already have what I need. Memories. Then he smiled a little. And if I forget, you'll remind me. After he left, I sat cross-legged on the rug and opened the first box. Inside were fragments of her life I hadn't seen in years. Old yearbooks, birthday cards I'd made her as a kid, some with glitter, some just messy stick figures. A VHS tape labeled Elena's First Steps Do Not Tape Over. I didn't even know she'd kept these. At the bottom, wrapped in a faded silk scarf, was something else, a small, square cassette player, and 2 labeled tapes. I carefully unfolded the scarf. One of the tapes said, Voice Journal, June-September. The other was labeled simply, To Elena. I stared at it. My hand trembled a little as I slid the tape in and pressed play. There was a click, then static, then her voice. Elena, I don't know if you'll ever find this. Maybe you'll throw these boxes out. Maybe they'll collect dust forever. But if you're hearing this, then I guess you made it through. And if you did, then I hope you're sitting down. Her voice was soft, tired, but full of her usual humor. I've tried to write this a dozen times, but the truth is, I needed you to hear it, not just read it. I needed my voice to meet your ears. Because there are things paper can't carry. I paused the tape. It was too much. Too soon. I went to the kitchen, made tea with the blue kettle she left me, and sat by the window with it clutched in both hands until the steam stopped rising. Then I went back and pressed play again. I've made mistakes. Some I've tried to fix. Others, I didn't know how. But the biggest one was letting others define who you were to me, letting them step in when they had no right. You've always been mine, and I've always been yours. The tape crackled again. I know they tried to edge you out. I know they whispered behind your back, made you feel small, made you feel like love had to be earned. But listen to me. You never had to earn mine. You were born with it. You carried it. Even when I couldn't speak it. You wore it like armor. She paused. I heard a faint cough, then the sound of her sipping water. I'm sorry for every time I didn't say it out loud. I'm sorry for the days I made you parent your own mother. I'm sorry for the distance, for the silence, for the way I sometimes disappeared even when you were right there. Her voice cracked just a little. I loved you. God, I loved you. That's when I cried again, but not the bitter kind. This was the kind that carves out a space and leaves it clean. That night, I sat with the second tape in my hands for hours but didn't play it. I wasn't ready. Instead, I opened the second box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, some addressed to old friends, Some never sent. Some were to me, dated during times I didn't even realize she'd been struggling. One was written on the back of a grocery list, another tucked into a stained envelope with no stamp. But one, written on thick stationery, was titled, "If She Ever Needs Proof." It read, "To the lawyer, if Elena ever feels she has to prove her place in this family, read this aloud. I don't care where. A courtroom, a living room, a sidewalk. Just read it." She'd signed it, dated it. It had been notarized. It was legal. I could have screamed. Not from rage, but from relief. My mom had known. She'd known how they would try to erase me, how they would pretend I wasn't hers just because I didn't fit their mold. She'd prepared for every dismissal, every cold glance, every smug little sentence like she's not really family. She'd left a paper trail. She'd built a fortress. The next day, I took the letter to Mr. Hale. He read it carefully, then looked up. This wasn't required. He said, "The will already secured everything, but she wanted it. You can tell. I want it on record." I said. He nodded. So he filed it, stamped and scanned. And just like that, her voice was in the system, unerasable. Later that week, I saw Patricia at the farmer's market. She was buying tomatoes. She looked up, startled to see me. Her lips parted like she might say something. Then she just said, "You look like her." I didn't respond. She kept going. "I suppose you'll be keeping the house too." "No," I said quietly. "I'm selling it, but I'm keeping what matters." Her eyes flicked to my neck, the necklace. She said nothing. Then she walked away. And that was the last time we spoke. No grand confrontation, no closure, just two women, divided by a truth one of them refused to accept. Back home, I finally pressed play on the second tape. It was short. "Hey, baby girl, just wanted to say thank you. For the tea, for the silence, for the laughter on the days I thought I forgot how to smile, when the world feels like it's swallowing you. Remember this, you are the best thing I ever made, and I loved making you." I sat there, tape humming with white noise. I whispered back, "I know." In the days that followed, I stopped waiting for closure and started building something quieter, peace. It didn't come all at once. It came in sips like lukewarm tea, small walks through old neighborhoods, long showers where I didn't realize I was crying until the water stopped. It came in the form of lists, groceries, bills, client deadlines, check the mail, water the plants. Tiny acts of normalcy to remind me I was still here. And then one morning, I received a package. No sender name, just my address in a familiar blocky handwriting. Inside was a photo album, handmade. I recognized the fabric cover Mom's old floral curtain she never threw out. Inside, photos had been carefully glued in, childhood shots of me at the park, blowing out birthday candles, hugging stuffed animals with names I no longer remembered. But it wasn't just the pictures, it was the captions. Each photo had one, some typed, some handwritten. Her laugh always made me believe I hadn't failed. First time she said she loved me without saying a word. No one will ever know what she gave up to keep me from breaking. Page after page, it became obvious Mom made this, but she never gave it to me. Maybe she wasn't ready. Maybe she was afraid. Maybe she wanted me to find it when I needed it most. At the back was a sticky note. 4 words. That was all. "Look how I saw you." I held the album against my chest and sat on the floor, breathing in the fabric. Her scent was long gone, but my body remembered it anyway. My grief was no longer sharp. It was dull, wide, like ocean waves brushing at my feet. That night, I called Daniel. I got a package. I told him. He chuckled. "The album. You knew I found it in the attic. Figured you'd want it when the noise died down. I smiled. Thank you. There was a pause. Then he said, I'm glad she left us both something, even if it wasn't the same. I think it was, I said, just in different languages. I spent the next week slowly boxing up things from the house. It wasn't easy. Every object had a shadow behind it. The spoon with the melted tip from when she left it too close to the burner. The lamp with the crooked shade she swore she'd fix but never did. The blanket she insisted was just the right weight even though it was falling apart. I donated some things, kept others. I decided to turn the living room into a small exhibition just for a day, not for the public, just for me. I arranged items on a long table, the opal necklace on a velvet square, her favorite teacup, the Neruda book, her gardening gloves, one of the tapes in a glass frame. I sat across from it and stared. It looked like a life. Small, quiet, fully hers. When the realtor came by to do a walkthrough of the property, he paused by the display. Family, he asked gently. I nodded. My mother. She must have been a strong woman. She was... He gave a soft smile. It's rare, you know, to see someone honored like this before the world tells you it's time to move on. I didn't reply. I just watched the dust motes swirl in the late afternoon light. A week later, the house sold. Not for a lot, but enough. Enough to give me options I'd never had. I paid off my lingering debts, fixed my car, and took a month off work. Not to travel, not to escape. Just to be. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. Abstract shapes, soft colors, layers on layers, like grief itself. I called the collection Opal. I didn't tell anyone why. I just hung them on the walls of my apartment and let them speak. Around that time, Daniel invited me to dinner. He'd just moved into a new condo, trying his hand at adulthood, as he called it. I brought a bottle of wine and one of Mom's framed quotes. Wherever you place your love, let it grow. We ate pasta he overcooked and sat on the floor because his furniture hadn't arrived yet. It was the first time in years I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. At one point, he said, You know, she would have loved this. She would have critiqued your sauce. He grinned, and then eaten 3 servings anyway. We toasted to her, and it didn't ache. Not like it used to. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail, an official one, from a local women's shelter. Apparently, my mother had been donating to them quietly for years. Every December, a check, no return address, just a note that read, For the women who carry more than they should. They reached out because her final donation came with a name, this time mine. She'd transferred it to me, and added a line. Let her carry on what I could not finish. I stared at the letter, hands shaking again. It was like she kept handing me pieces of herself, long after she was gone, not to burden me, but to trust me. I scheduled a visit. The shelter was in an old building with chipped paint and a mural of handprints across the entrance. Inside, it smelled of soup, soap, and something unnameable, but warm. I met the director, a woman named Carla, who hugged me like we'd known each other for years. She talked about you all the time, Carla said. Never used your name. Just called you my reason. I didn't know what to say. Carla gave me a tour, showed me where my mom's donations had helped renovate the daycare room. Bright walls, books, crayons, blankets. As I stood there, watching 2 little girls build a crooked block tower, I realized something. Mom had already built her legacy. It wasn't just in the will, or the necklace, or the tapes. It was in the way people remembered her, soft, stubborn, fierce in the places no one expected. And now, somehow, I was part of that night. I sat by my window, watching the city fall asleep. I lit a candle, placed the jewelry box beside it, and pressed play on the tape again. This time, I didn't cry. I listened, not as a daughter aching for proof, but as a woman who knew she'd been loved, who knew she was seen, and as the tape ended in that soft static hum, I whispered into the quiet room, "I'm still your reason." It was a Tuesday afternoon when I stood in front of the community center bulletin board, pinning up a small flyer I'd designed the night before. My hands trembled just a little as I smoothed it down. At the top, bold and bright opal circle, a storytelling workshop for women reclaiming their voice led by Elena Reyes. Below that, a few simple lines. Come sit, speak, or just listen. This is a space for memory, silence, grief, and becoming. I stepped back. It looked small, humble, maybe even forgettable to some. But to me, it felt like the loudest thing I'd ever done. The idea came to me after visiting the shelter a second time. I brought old books from Mom's shelves and a few prints of my paintings. One of the women, maybe 19 at most, stood in front of one piece, an abstract bloom of white, pink, and violet, and whispered, "It looks like how I used to feel." That stuck with me. So I started thinking, what if there was a space not just to be helped, but to speak? Not in polished paragraphs, not in well-lit therapy rooms, just in a circle, with tea, with stories, with no pressure to be brave, but permission to be messy. That was how Mom spoke near the end. Not like a heroine, just like a woman. Tired, beautiful, unfiltered. She would have loved this idea. Maybe she even planted it. I emailed Carla and booked the smallest room in the center for every Thursday evening. I printed 20 flyers and passed them around town. The woman at the post office said she'd put one in the window. The barista at the cafe offered to share it with her book club. By Thursday, I expected silence. Maybe one person, two, if I was lucky. 9 women showed up. We sat in a lopsided circle of folding chairs. Some crossed their arms. Others stared at the floor. One of them wore sunglasses the entire time. No one spoke for the first 15 minutes. So I started. "I'm Elena," I said softly. I used to think being quiet meant I was invisible. Now I think quiet might be where everything sacred begins. A pause. Then I told them the story. Not the whole version, not the will, not Patricia, just the part about my mom's voice on tape, saying I didn't have to earn her love. One woman cried, another nodded, and slowly, one by one, stories began to spill. A woman who hadn't seen her daughter in 3 years. A teenage mother who said no one in her family knew she was here. A grandmother who used to write poems but stopped when her husband said no one cared. That night, the room became something else. Not a place for fixing, just for holding. By the time we left, someone had brought tea bags for next week. Someone else promised to bring a candle. It grew from there. Weeks passed, then months. The opal circle became more than a workshop. It became a rhythm. A woman brought her daughter. Another brought a photo of her sister. One night, we sat in silence for 20 minutes straight. No one spoke. No one needed to. We just breathed. Someone left a note in the donation jar that read, "This circle gave me back my name." Another woman started painting again. Another applied to nursing school. We never applauded. That wasn't our way. But we witnessed, and that was enough. One Thursday, near the end of winter, Daniel came by. He stood outside the circle, awkward in his button-down and blazer, holding a tin of cookies like a peace offering. I waved him in. He sat beside me, knees bouncing. At one point, a woman named Liza, who rarely spoke, looked right at him and said, "You're the cousin, aren't you?" He blinked. "I guess I am." She smiled. You're lucky she let you in. He nodded, quietly. That night, as we walked back to our cars, Daniel said, she would have been proud of this. She already is. He hesitated. You still listen to the tapes? Sometimes. Do you hear new things in them? I thought about that. Not new words. Just deeper ones. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't have to. Spring bloomed like a slow confession, flowers pushing through pavement cracks, light staying longer than it used to. I started painting outdoors again, setting up a canvas in the park near the apartment, watching strangers walk by and pause. One afternoon, an older woman tapped me on the shoulder. You're Carmen Reyes's daughter, aren't you? I blinked. I am. She taught me how to bind books at the library years ago. Said her daughter would probably forget how to cook but remember how to listen. I laughed. She was right about both. The woman smiled. She always said her legacy wouldn't be loud, just felt. That stayed with me for days. I wrote it in my journal that night. A legacy that is felt. Isn't that what we're all trying to leave behind? Eventually, the house keys stopped feeling heavy in my pocket. I gave the last copy to the realtor, watched them lock it one final time. The new owners were a young couple. First home, big dreams. No idea that the walls had held stories. I left a note in the kitchen drawer. If this house feels warmer than expected, don't question it. Just say thank you. Carmen Reyes lived here. The final thing I kept wasn't valuable, not in any traditional sense. It was a cracked ceramic mug with the words, "World's okayest mom" on the side. I found it tucked behind a box of tea in the back of her cupboard. A silly gift I'd once given her after a fight. I'd thrown it on the counter in a huff, muttering something about, "At least I'm honest." She laughed so hard she cried. She used it every morning after that. I drink from it now. Every Thursday, before the Opal Circle. I fill it with chamomile and sit for 10 minutes. No phone, no music, just breath, memory, silence. Sometimes I hear her voice, not from the tape, but inside me, unfolding like petals. One evening, Carla from the shelter invited me to speak at a fundraiser, just a small speech. She said, nothing formal. I stood on stage in a borrowed dress, lights warm against my skin, the opal necklace sitting gently at my collarbone. I didn't prepare notes. I just told the truth. I used to think family was about who showed up for birthdays, who sent the longest Christmas cards, who smiled in group photos. But now I know it's quieter than that. Family is who stays when you fall apart and keeps holding you when you come back together differently. People nodded. A few wept. And afterward, a woman I'd never met came up and whispered, "Your mother would be proud." I smiled. She is. That night, I lay in bed with the window open, the sound of distant wind chimes drifting in like lullabies. I reached for the second tape again, listened one last time. When it ended, I didn't feel loss. I felt presence. A hand on my shoulder, a laugh in my chest, a voice in my blood. "I'm still your reason," I whispered again. And this time, I didn't need to hear her say it back, because I already knew. The 1-year mark came without warning. No date circled on the calendar, no candlelit ceremony, just a slow dawning, like walking into a familiar room and realizing something's missing and somehow, you're still breathing. It was April again. The jacaranda trees had begun to bloom in bursts of lavender, the same way they had the morning I was turned away at my mother's front door. But this time, they didn't sting. Their petals floated like small offerings, soft and quiet, onto the pavement as I walked to the community center. I brought wildflowers with me that evening, yellow, pink, white, and placed them in the center of the circle. No one asked why. They knew. Each woman touched the bouquet on their way in, a quiet ritual we hadn't spoken about but somehow agreed upon. Grief, I've learned, doesn't need instructions. It just needs space. I didn't plan to speak much that night, but after a few moments of silence, one of the newer women Raina asked, "Did she know about this place before she passed?" I looked at her. Her eyes were so young, like I used to be. "No," I said. "She never saw it, but she left pieces of it in me." Raina tilted her head. "How did she teach you how to do all this if she wasn't around for it?" I smiled softly. Not by instruction, just by love, and absence, and everything in between. That night, after everyone left, I stayed behind to sweep the floor. It always made me feel close to her. She loved sweeping, said it was the one chore that gave her peace because you could see what you'd gathered. I swept the petals into a neat pile, took a photo of them on my phone, and saved it to a folder titled Soft Proof. Proof that something once bloomed. Proof that something remained. A few weeks later, I got an invitation I hadn't expected. A local gallery wanted to feature my paintings. They had seen the small pieces I hung in the cafe and asked if I'd consider expanding into a full exhibit. I almost said no. I hadn't painted for show, only for survival. But something about the way they asked, gentle, curious, reverent, made me pause. They didn't want explanations, just presence. So I said yes. The show was called Inheritance. It featured 12 pieces, all based on moments I hadn't been able to speak aloud. A painting of a doorway with no knob, a quilt unraveling midair, a woman with no face, but eyes in her palms. One titled, "You Forgot I Was Watching a Swirl of Shadow and Gold." Each one bore a fragment of her, and of me. The night of the opening, Daniel came with flowers. "They're not from Patricia," he said quickly. "She doesn't know how to buy flowers for anyone." I laughed. "You remembered? She hated opals." He added, "Said they looked unfinished. Maybe that's why I love them." He nodded. "Me too." We walked the gallery together. People whispered. Some wept. Others stood too long in front of a canvas, trying to name what they felt. I didn't explain anything. Let them wonder. Let them ache. Let them see. That night, when I got home, I pulled out the final note from the jewelry box. It had been hidden beneath the velvet lining, folded so many times the paper had gone soft. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just a single line in Mom's handwriting. "Don't make your life smaller just because they refuse to stretch." I read it once, then again. Then I pinned it above my desk, next to a childhood photo of us eating ice cream on the porch. My bangs crooked, her eyes tired, both of us laughing with mouths wide open. We had known joy, even in the worst seasons. We had known joy. That summer, the Opal Circle partnered with the shelter. Carla called me one morning, breathless. "We got the grant, the one you wrote with the art therapy pilot. They loved it." I pressed the phone to my heart. "Are you serious? You're going to need to hire help." Help. It took me a full minute to realize what that meant. I wasn't doing this alone anymore. So I asked Raina to co-facilitate. She agreed, eyes wide and stunned. "But I don't know how to lead anything." She said, "You don't have to." I told her, "Just show up as yourself. That's more than enough." We started a youth version of the circle, then a second group for single mothers, then an art and poetry night that brought in over 40 people. It wasn't about outreach. It was about inreach, about giving women a way back into themselves. And each time someone cried, or laughed unexpectedly, or told a secret they hadn't spoken aloud in decades, I felt my mother there. In the room, in the air, in me. A year after the will was read, Patricia sent a card. It was blank. No note inside. Just a card with a magnolia on the front. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Not every door needs reopening. Some are meant to stay closed, with silence as the final word. But I did call Uncle Theo. We met at a quiet diner halfway between our neighborhoods. He ordered black coffee. I ordered pancakes. It was barely 9 a.m., but he looked like he'd already lived a full day. I saw your gallery on the news, he said. She would have cried. Elena. I know. He looked down at his coffee. I think about her a lot these days, about how little I really knew her. You knew enough, I said. You showed up when it mattered. He nodded. Too late. Maybe. But I got there. We ate mostly in silence, but it was a good silence, like a song with no words, just rhythm. Before he left, he handed me a small box. This was in her glove compartment. He said, I don't know why I didn't give it to you sooner. Maybe I was afraid you'd stop needing us after all this. I opened the box when I got home. Inside was a tiny locket. Inside the locket, 2 photos. One of me as a baby. One of her, younger than I'd ever seen her. Wild hair and freckled cheeks. There was a single folded note. You will outgrow the pain, but keep the softness. I held the locket in my hand for a long time. Then I put it on. Today, the apartment is quiet, not empty, just peaceful. There's a plant in every window, paint on my fingers, a voice in my chest. The opal necklace still rests against my collarbone, but I don't wear it every day now. I don't need to. She's here in other ways, in my hands, in my work, in the softness I kept. The final tape hasn't been played in months, not because I've forgotten, but because I remember. And that's enough. The second autumn came quietly. No fanfare, no calendar notification. Just cooler mornings, a thin film of dew on the balcony railing, and the subtle shift in how the light moved across my kitchen floor. It was the time of year Mom loved best. She always said fall made everything feel honest, like the world had nothing left to prove. I opened the window and let the crisp air in. The leaves on the tree outside had begun to burn amber and gold. Somewhere in the city, the first smell of chimney smoke drifted upward. Everything felt slower, measured, sacred. I pulled a worn sweater over my shoulders and made tea in the blue kettle, the one she left me, the one that sings just before boiling. That day, I had nothing on the schedule. No circle meeting, no client deadlines, no gallery talks. Just time. It felt rare, and a little lonely, but not in the aching way, in the space-making way. So I decided to walk. No destination, no playlist, just keys in one pocket and her locket in the other. I wandered down familiar streets, past the park where I used to read during her chemo appointments, past the hardware store she swore had the best light bulbs, past the mural on 9th Street now faded and flaked at the corners, like memory itself. I ended up at the cemetery. I hadn't planned to go. I hadn't been in months. I stood at the gates, palms sweaty, heart quiet. Then I stepped in. The path to her plot was still uneven. Tiny stones pressed into the soil like forgotten words. Her headstone was simple, just the way she wanted. No angel carvings, no quotes. Just her name, her birth and death dates, and one line: she made silence a place you could rest. I remember the argument we had about it. Don't you want something poetic, I asked once, weeks before she passed. She shook her head, smiling weakly. I want what's true. I knelt beside the grave, brushed off the dried leaves. The ground felt cool beneath my knees. I didn't cry. I just sat. Talked to her the way I always did. Told her about the circle's latest theme, what we thought we couldn't say. Told her about Daniel starting therapy. Told her about the locket. About Theo. About Raina getting a scholarship. I even told her about Patricia's silent card. Then I fell quiet. The wind picked up. A few acorns dropped from the tree behind me, thudding softly like little affirmations. I think I'm okay now, I said aloud, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. Maybe both of us. Maybe neither. The cemetery was empty. Just me, the trees, and the faint rustling of October. Before I left, I placed a fresh opal stone on her grave, something I'd picked up at a gem shop weeks ago, without knowing why. It shimmered faintly in the light, incomplete, unpolished, perfect. On the way home, I stopped at the market and picked up fresh figs. She used to slice them and drizzle them with honey, calling them dessert for people who've seen enough sweetness to not need sugar. I made that exact dish that evening, lit a single candle, sat at the kitchen table with my sketchbook open, and wrote one line over and over again across the page. I am not outside of this family. I am its continuation. The repetition felt holy, like reclaiming. Later that week, Carla invited me to speak at the shelter's donor dinner, not to ask for money, just to remind them who they were helping. I stood on the small wooden stage in a simple black dress, hair pulled back, the opal necklace catching light like breath. I spoke the way Mom used to tell stories, with small pauses, with earned silence, with vulnerability stitched into every sentence. I used to think the people who hurt me needed to understand what they'd done. I said, voice steady. But now I think some healing happens in the absence of apology. Not because forgiveness erases things, but because carrying pain forever doesn't honor what was beautiful. A woman at the front table clutched her napkin. Another reached for her husband's hand. I looked out at the sea of faces and said the truest thing I knew: I lost a mother. But I found her again. In strangers. In stories. In the quiet I was once afraid of. When I stepped down, the applause was warm but soft. The kind Mom would have approved of. No performance. Just presence. That evening, back home, I opened the jewelry box again. The velvet was more faded than before, the hinges a little looser, but the necklace still gleamed like it held its own memory. I reached beneath the fabric again, though I knew there were no more notes, no more secrets. Instead, I placed a new one, my own. I wrote a letter, short, just one paragraph. To the woman who finds this after I'm gone, I hope you know the things we inherit are not always things. Sometimes they're the quiet we carry, the questions we ask, the voices we choose to believe. I leave this not as proof of value, but as permission to make your own meaning, and to know you were never invisible. I folded it, slipped it under the velvet, closed the lid, and felt, for the first time, like the circle had truly closed, not in finality, but in fullness. There's a new girl in the circle. Her name is May. She hasn't spoken yet. Just listens, eyes wide and silent, sipping tea from the corner. She reminds me of myself a year ago, last night. I placed a small drawing beside her seat, just a pencil sketch of an opal, captioned with 4 words, "You don't need proof." She didn't say anything, but she took it home. Sometimes that's how it starts. Now, every morning, I light a stick of incense on the windowsill. Not for ritual, just for rhythm. I write for 20 minutes, sketch for 15, make tea, feed the plants, open the windows, let the light in. It's not a grand life, but it's mine. And I fill it with intention, with softness, with the understanding that identity is not given by family votes or inheritance documents, but by memory and grace and the ways we rise after being erased. I don't think about Patricia much anymore. She's a shadow in a house I no longer live in, and if she ever reaches out again, I don't know how I'll respond. Maybe I won't. Maybe silence is the right answer sometimes. Not as punishment, but as preservation. Tonight, I walk the beach again, the same one where I first opened the jewelry box, held her letter, let myself grieve. The tide is low, the stars are out, and I swear, if I listen closely, I can still hear her voice faint but firm carried in the waves. I whisper back, not in sorrow, but in gratitude, because even though she's gone, I am still her reason, and she, mine.